with a misdemeanor or nonviolent felony crimes. I note at the outset that jails, quote, have virtually no discretion to refuse to accept persons properly committed to their custody. Again, we all have a role to play. The jail's job is to accept these individuals, and we will problem solve with them on what to do for their medical conditions, but they absolutely need to be accepted at this time. Our Attorney General further also mentions that in the event that counties, in which case for us, this is of course MDC, should prudently draft thoughtful criteria concerning the people its law enforcement officers will arrest, since these arrestees must be admitted to the jail once arrested. Again, this is very clear, and unfortunately this was happening before Corona, but it has gotten worse and has gotten extremely more dangerous. Now, we have been in touch with county leadership, and we're excited to work with them. We are waiting on a response, so hopefully we'll get that this week. And I know there's also new leadership at the jail, so I hope now that there's new leadership out there, we can get this straightened out, not just now during Corona, but also going forward. And I know everyone's in a difficult situation right now. We're all doing our best. But in this case, we just simply have to do better. The jail has to accept APD's arrestees. Now, I want to move a little bit onto the backstory of some folks who end up at our jail and what's happening with crime right now in our town. First, let me mention that we haven't seen major changes in crime. We're going to go into some of the details here, and I want to also share that all of this information is based on the call-out data. And so, as with all call-out data, those, the actual records and so forth may change once the call-outs are different and so forth, but this is our sort of real-time call-out data that we've always been using. And for us, really, this points to a couple of things. Number one, calls are down. That is a good thing. So I want to thank Albuquerque for respecting 911 and ask them to continue to do that. Please call 242-COPS for non-urgent issues. And again, save 911 for urgent issues. Want to make sure that all our frontline officers know, too, they are still extremely busy, even though the calls are down. And you will see that despite the fact that calls are down, things like commercial burglary are up. This is expected because everyone is home instead of working. And so we are working diligently to try and deal with this issue. We also know that we haven't seen a big spike in domestic violence, but we are very concerned about it. And we know this is a high-risk time for domestic violence with people being out of work, stress running high, and so forth. And so we are ready. We have a high-risk deployment situation set up for domestic violence. We want everyone to know that the respective hotlines and channels to get help and report help are very much open, and APD is ready to work on this issue. So we know that crime is changing and that criminals are also changing tactics, and so is our police department. So as we go through this time, whether it's shuttered businesses leading to more commercial burglaries or more people being at home and fewer residential burglaries, more eyes on the street, more opportunity to actually communicate what's going on in your neighborhood with 242-COPS and with your own neighborhood listservs and so forth. This is actually a time when we can help reduce crime, at least in our neighborhoods, while APD works on trying to keep our businesses safe. I also want to mention that we continue to hire more officers. Recall that we are living in this situation from a public safety perspective with an existing officer shortage. As I mentioned about a month ago, we fortunately got 50 new recruits out on the street. We graduated them technically. We didn't do it publicly because of the mass gathering ban, but they're out on the streets, but they're still in training for several more months before they can actually be out on patrol by themselves. But in the meantime, we are continuing to take lateral hires. We're continuing to fill the next academy class, and we continue to want to meet our goal of 100 new officers this year. And of course, 50 already out on the street, which is a very good thing, but again, still in training. Now, we also know that because of this, we need lots of flexibility. So on Monday, we talked about the safety protocols that we've put in place for our police department, and again, borrowing from best practices around the country to try and prevent what's happened to some departments in the East Coast with respect to corona in police departments. And so those programs are in place, but it does require a lot of flexibility. We're asking officers who normally don't take calls to take calls. We're asking everyone to be very flexible, especially our detectives who are doing all sorts of things, whether it's undercover and otherwise. It's all hands on deck right now at APD, and so far they're doing a very good job. So with a little bit more on some of these details, I want to hand it over to our Deputy Chief, J.J. Grego. Come on up.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your leadership and support as well as we go through these unprecedented times. As usual, we monitor calls for service. These are the calls that come into the Emergency Communication Center from the community. The data that I'm about to talk about is based on those calls itself. The reason we use this data set that we're going to talk about is because it gives us real-time information on trends. What we do is we look at the calls for service, compare them to last year, and then we can see where we're trending at as kind of on a real-time basis. Because this data is captured at the very inception of the call, it is subject to change. It may not always reflect the final disposition, as the mayor had said. Some of these call types are more accurate than others in reflecting what actually transpired. And we'll go, I'll give you an example. Burglaries and aggravated assault calls for service, they have a higher degree of congruency with the final report type. Everybody pretty much knows what those are, and the call type is very specific. Family disputes can range from simple verbal arguments to domestic violence. Because of this broad call type, further analysis is needed when we look at the data. But again, if we compare calls for service based upon time frame to the same time frame last year, it gives us a fairly clear picture of the trend information. Aggravated assault battery, is that the first one? Yeah. All right, so as you can see, when we compare this year's calls versus last year during the same time period, we're seeing essentially an overall decrease during the time frame that we're talking about. Now, this type of call can involve anything from threats with a deadly weapon and confrontations resulting in serious injury to an individual. The next slide is going to be on auto burglaries, and we are seeing a decrease overall in auto burglaries. A high number of these generally occur at commercial establishments such as movie theaters, gyms, and whatnot, and it may reflect that those businesses are closed, and that's why we're seeing a decrease. Commercial burglaries, this is the one that we have noted an increase in, and as the mayor said, we will divert resources such as detectives from the investigative bureau while keeping in mind that we need to be flexible to keep officers in the community safe. And I do want to reemphasize, if you see something suspicious as you're out and about, traveling to the grocery store, from the grocery store, please don't hesitate to call us. I'd much rather have an officer go out and talk to somebody and it be nothing than it result in a burglary later down the road. Residential burglaries. We're seeing a decrease in residential burglaries, and that is likely because people are at home. Burglars don't like to break into houses when people are home. Disturbance calls. This is a relatively broad category that encompasses things such as to unrelated people arguing, trespassing, and minor assaults. And we are seeing that they were down as well. But they are starting to trend up. Family dispute calls. The calls for service are relatively flat or decreased, as you can see. And we'll need to do more analysis to the data to see how much of those or how many of those are actually resulting in arrests. If we look at projections based on interpolated data and trends, it indicates that this may rise commensurate with the periods of isolation. We continue to work with our partners, such as the Domestic Violence Resource Center, to ensure services are available. We've also initiated an embedded advocacy program with the District Attorney's Office, District Court, UNMH, and Presbyterian Hospital. And I want to emphasize that there are resources available for those individuals who are victims of domestic violence that step up and wish to avail themselves to those resources. And we will be waiting here to help. That's all I had.
All right, thanks, Chief. Thank you so much, Chief Griego. Okay, now to wrap things up before we take some questions, just want to mention that there's some ways people can help. Number one, our Metro 15 program, very much up and running. We had 3 arrests last week off Metro 15, and you can help with that program by calling Crime Stoppers at 843-STOP. Also want to remind folks it's a great time to be a good neighbor and report suspicious activity. This is something with so many of us out on our streets. Go ahead and call it in. Again, 242 cops for that kind of reporting. But also, if you can, if folks are walking around and they're close to business areas, we are encouraging pedestrian walking in front of businesses. So, this could be corners where you might have a particular strip mall or something like that that's near your house. Try and do your walking route around some of those, and that'll just help everyone a little bit keep an eye on things. And then again, call if you see anything suspicious. Now, I think also with respect to myth busting, I just want to mention there's still a lot around tax season with respect to the IRS asking for your information in exchange for a stimulus check. That is definitely a myth and a scam. So please watch out for that. Takeout in the office a couple of days ago, I forgot to mention, was from Golden Crown Ponderia. Thank you so much for that. All right, with that, we will take your questions.
So, just what's your take on like the tally for homicides this year? Because April 16th of last year, I believe we were at 22. So has it decreased this year with everything that's going on with COVID?
So the question is around homicides and where are we at with respect to that, especially compared to last year. So I'll tee up our Deputy Chief to field that, or Gilbert.
So essentially with homicides, what we are seeing and what we look at when we start to look at trends is 28-day analysis. And over the last 28 days, we're actually down 20%. Overall for the year, we are up. However, we use that 28-day analysis to look at how our efforts are being effective or not being effective. Correlation doesn't always mean causation, so we have to look at these issues in the context of the coronavirus crisis and make adjustments from there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically as of now compared to last, we are up, but it has decreased within the
28 days, correct.
Do you have the specific number as of today?
I don't have the specific number as of today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, other questions? All right. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So TJ has one on unemployment numbers. The state shows that it went up from 9,000 to 44,000. Can you just kind of talk about, what the city is doing to help just with unemployment numbers still rising?
So the question is a little bit about unemployment numbers continuing to rise. And of course, the biggest thing I think we're doing is we're encouraging people to apply for it, because we want to make sure that people don't get in more desperate situations where they go down a much more dangerous path with respect to either behavioral health or criminal justice. So for us, the important thing is that those people are applying. That's actually in some ways healthy at this time. Now, of course, we have a slew of programs that we announced Tuesday. So for solopreneurs and the creative economy, there is a city support program, $500,000 in that. The winners of that will be announced probably in a couple of weeks. And of course, we announced our 140 small micro businesses who received a business saving check. Those are all going out this week. And so there's some very, very grateful small businesses right now for that city's support. So those are some of the things the city's working on. The rest is all available on our website if you look on economic impact right under COVID or through our economic development department.
Mayor, we have one from Chris McKee from Channel 13. Has APD done any enforcement action toward Calibers and its Albuquerque locations thus far? As I understand, they remain open even though that they have been deemed a non-essential business by the state.
The question is just about some of these folks that are still open and deemed non-essential. And I think the short story is the state is in charge of enforcement on that. Again, we've worked with them and we've prioritized on our end smoke shops and metering at big retail stores. And so that's what we've been focused on. And so I would really direct that question to the state police.
Second question from Chris McKee as well. Do you have a number or statistic of people people that APD has arrested who the jail has refused to take?
We have numerous examples of that, and what we will do, the question is about the folks who've been refused to the jail. So what we'll do is forward the letters that we've written that outline each one of those specific cases. And I know they're, if I can find the chief's letter here, what we'll do is basically we'll give you the specifics on that in the letter that was written by our chief to the county. And so that's already, I know, been covered a little bit, but the details are in that letter. So I think, Chief, you might have taken my notes. So anyway, other questions?
We have one about how much are, like, parades costing when officers are going to either the hospitals or the fire department for, like driving by the hospitals or like these birthday parades. How much is that costing the city, or is it costing the city anything?
The question is about, how much are these different things costing? The incremental cost is basically nothing. So we pull people off at a low time in the day in terms of call volume, and we keep it short, and then go forward. So those shouldn't be costing anything extra. Other questions?
As far as the arrests, are they mostly from the Metro 15, like the program itself? Or arrests made?
No, there's a wide range of arrests that have been made with respect to this challenge we're having at MDC. And so it ranges from, again, very violent folks to folks who are not. But again, that determination is really about what the judge decides whether or not that's warranted. When an officer lawfully arrests someone, they take them to the jail. This is, very basic operations that unfortunately has been not working very well since January. So I want to give some examples to the question here because I found my notes here. We've got January 23rd. We have the jail rejecting someone because they, quote, smelled bad. That is actually in the report. We have examples January 31st of a prisoner being rejected for high blood pressure. Another example in January where they were rejected and then taken to UNMH and seen by a physician and cleared, and then upon returning to MDC were rejected again because they would not answer questions, and again the prisoner was taken back to UNMH. Again, we have other examples of those. Those are just three examples from a previous letter that we had sent on this issue that, again, is part of this challenge that we're having. Okay, anything else?
One more question from Matthew Reason, asking about the reliance on domestic violence arrest data. He says that data shows that domestic violence is up significantly from 34 TV arrests a week to 62 arrests a week between March 18th to 24th and April 1st through 7th. He's wondering about that data versus the data that was presented today.
Sure, the questions about some of the domestic violence data, and DC Greg will take that one.
So what we look at when we were talking about calls for service is calls for service for family disputes. And as I had said before, some of those will translate into domestic violence, some of them will not. So it takes a deeper dive into the data to determine where we're at as compared to last year and where the trends are going. That's one of the things that we'll look at and one of the things that we are evaluating right now.
So the family disputes compared from this year compared to last year, it decreased, isn't that the question?
So I'll just help. The question is, did they decrease from this year compared to last year? That's what we're seeing, but we are worried that will not be the case. So we're very concerned. We know around the country that has not been the case. And hopefully that continues, but we're concerned, but we're also trying to be ready for if that trend changes.
Last question, Jessica Dyer really would like this one asked today. The Center for Public Integrity today reported that Albuquerque is among several cities with a total of $1.8 million in outstanding public safety bills out to the Trump campaign. How, if at all, is the city pursuing payment, and has collection of that money taken on any additional importance given the COVID situation?
The question, I hardly even remember this because it seems so long ago, but I think this was about when Trump came to visit and expenses that we had for all the protection and closing downtown and so forth. So that is being handled like every other accounts receivable. And so finance can provide details, but we give notices every 30 days. I think eventually there's a fine process. We're treating that no different than we would anything else. And that's even the same, whether it's during Corona time or not. It's the same as it was before. All right. Okay, with that, we'll see folks. Tomorrow our game plan is to talk about the budget. So we are hoping for a full financial update unless there's something more urgent that's pressing. We'll see you tomorrow at 11:30 to talk about the city's finances and the economic forecast for central New Mexico. Thanks.